was swampy! Their mobility was gone. The battle became a rout.
The legacy was immediate.
This was not a battle. It was a miracle.
The year is 1177. The place, Montgisard. "500 knights stare down 26,000 Ayyubid veterans. Their king is a 16-year-old leper. Their enemy is the legendary Saladin. This was a confrontation facing total, immediate annihilation. A moment frozen in time. This fragile speck, illuminated by the sun's harsh gaze. Or was it?
Forget the silver mask.
That was a fiction of cinema.
Forget the image of a fragile invalid.
This was a gross distortion. The man was Baldwin IV.
He was the anointed king of Jerusalem.
For centuries, this sacred space held drawn pilgrims.
The accounts of his contemporaries, like William of Tyre, paint a different picture.
He was a brilliant student.
He was a skilled horseman.
He was trained for war since childhood, despite his illness.
He was a king who commanded loyalty, not through pity, but by leading from the front.
This was the theater of war.
To the south, Saladin had conquered Egypt.
To the east, he had consolidated Syria.
He had forged a unified Ayyubid empire from warring states.
His stated, righteous goal was the reclamation of Jerusalem.
Compressed by the lens and distorted by the desert heat, the Haram al-Sharif remains a focal point of faith and conflict in the Holy Land.
The Crusader states were an island surrounded by a hostile sea. But their greatest weakness was not Saladin. It was internal. Baldwin's leprosy was a political death sentence. It guaranteed he would leave no direct heir.
court was a viper's nest of factions.
Nobles schemed for control.
They plotted for the hand of his sister, Sibylla. They were carving up the kingdom before the king was even dead. Saladin did not just see a holy city.
He saw a power vacuum.
He saw a prize fractured by ambition. He knew the kingdom was rotting from within.
He simply had to wait for the opportune moment to strike.
500 versus 26,000.
This is the myth of Montgisard.
It is a powerful image.
It is also fundamentally wrong.
The chronicler, William of Tyre, likely exaggerated Saladin's numbers for dramatic effect.
Model estimates place the Ayyubid force closer to 18,000.
The number 500 was presented as fact, but in the deconstruction, we see that the number itself was merely an elaborate fabrication.
But the Frankish 500 is the greater deception.
To understand the present, we must first revisit the past.
Those 455 knights were merely the spear tip.
They were the arrière-ban, the noble leaving.
They were supported by thousands of infantry.
They were bolstered by crossbowmen and Turcopoles.
This was not a band of 500.
It was a combined arms force of nearly 4,000.
In the vast darkness, the equation holds true. A moment of perfect symmetry.
Now, we analyze the instruments of power.
Saladin's primary weapon was the Mamluk.
These were elite, loyal slave soldiers.
His heavy cavalry formed a devastating veteran corps.
They were a flexible, mobile, and battle-hardened army.
When the Titans clashed, the very future hung in the balance. This is the story of their ultimate confrontation. The Frankish weapon was different.
It was singular.
It was terrifying.
It was the unified, full-tilt, heavy cavalry charge.
This was not a piecemeal attack.
It was a wall of heavy lances, kite shields,
and armored destriers.
It was trained to be a single, cohesive shockwave. It was a kinetic weapon of pure, shattering impact. It was designed to break any line it struck. This was the irresistible force.
The Crusader supply lines are exposed near the river, my lord.
Saladin saw his chance.
He called it the splendid opportunity. The Frankish army had fractured. A large contingent under Philip of Flanders had marched north.
Jerusalem itself was left exposed.
Saladin's intelligence was, for the most part, correct.
But their arrogance, their hubris, would ultimately be their undoing.
He invaded!
He bypassed Gaza. He marched directly for the fortress of Ascalon. He knew Baldwin was in sick. He knew the king had only a few hundred knights. Saladin trapped the Leper King. He had neutralized the one man who could unite the Frankish lords. And here, Saladin made his fatal error. It was an error born of hubris. He believed the war was already won. He believed the boy king was irrelevant. He dispersed his massive army to plunder the countryside. He sent detachments to Lydda and Ramla. His columns fanned out, disorganized, heavy with loot. He began his leisurely march on Jerusalem. He was so confident of victory, he marched without adequate scouts. He was marching blind. He did not know the king was coming. The miracle was an escape. Baldwin was not trapped. He was waiting. He broke out of Ascalon. He consolidated his small force with the Templars. He shadowed Saladin's army. But he did not attack.
Not yet.
He had one more instrument of power.
It was not a weapon.
It was a man. He was
Balian of Ibelin.
Forensic analysis confirms this location, once obscured by time, is where the sequence began.
Balian and his brother knew this land.
It was their home.
They guided the Frankish army to a precise location, Montgisard. They lured Saladin's overconfident, scattered column into unfavorable terrain.
The ground was marshy.
It was swampy!
It was a tactical nightmare for heavy cavalry.
Saladin's Mamluks, his greatest weapon, were mired. They were disorganized. Their mobility was gone.
As the clouds parted, a divine shimmer broke the silence. The king
Then Baldwin charged.
This was no random act of valor.
It was a tactical ambush. They aimed directly for Saladin's personal bodyguard.
The shockwave shattered the column.
Panic ripped through the disorganized Ayyubid ranks.
The battle became a rout.
The legacy was immediate.
It was brutal.
Saladin's army was not defeated.
His personal baggage was captured. His Mamluk guard was slaughtered. It was a complete, humiliating reputational disaster.
He barely escaped the field, fleeing back to Cairo on a racing camel.
Everything they believed about the universe was true. Until this moment.
But this was not a strategic turning point.
The war was not over.
Montgisard was the last great victory of Baldwin's reign.
It was a glorious 10-year reprieve,
fought with courage and tactical genius.
It was a triumph that held the kingdom together.
And so, the final grains descend. A stark reminder that all things, but it was only a reprieve. Baldwin would die.
The factions would tear the kingdom apart.
And 10 years later, at Hattin, a new Frankish army would make its own fatal error.
Saladin would not.
This time, Jerusalem would fall.
The miracle was not divine.
It was a masterpiece of opportunism.
It was forged from an enemy's hubris.
It was forged from a king's courage.
And it was forged from the intimate, tactical knowledge of a swammy patch of land.
For centuries, the empire expanded, driven by an insatiable hunger for power. This is the chronicle of their conquest.
The myth of the silver mask endures.
It is cinematic.
It is tragic.
But the truth of Montgisard is more powerful.
It is the story of a brilliant commander who, for one day, achieved the impossible.
This is the story of how empires are forged. Whose conquest chronicle should we reconstruct next?
Nominate a new commander in the comments.